Greetings, citizens of planet Earth. Welcome back to another episode of the Mystery Dome. Tonight we will be talking about infinity, which I said earlier at the end of my last video. Now you're wondering why my computer isn't on and it's completely black. Well, for the effect to come across as infinity, there can be no light, only infinite darkness, to truly understand what I'm talking about. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, you learned pretty early in school that there's an infinite amount of numbers, and these numbers never end, and the concept of never ending comes up extremely commonly. This is the basic concept of infinity, but it's very complicated in reality, and we can apply it to the real world in ways that make it seem extremely complicated. For example, there's a hotel, I can't remember the name of it, that has an infinite number of rooms, and each room is occupied by a person. Now, say a person walks in to the hotel. Does the person there just say, "Sorry, we're full, come back later"? No, that's not the case. Because it's infinite, even though there's an infinite number of people, the person in room number 1 moves to room 2, the person in room 2 to room 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and since there's an infinite number of rooms, you'll never run out of rooms to put people in, opening up the one room. Now this is extremely interesting because it brings up the topic that finite numbers do not affect infinite values. For example, you can divide or multiply infinity by anything, and it will not change the fact that it is infinity. Anything finite, that is. Now this is further complicated by the fact that there are multiple types of infinity. What I mean by that is there isn't just one never-ending loop. There are multiple infinities that exist, multiple levels of infinity. Now, the hotel example I'm talking about is countable infinity, which is the smallest level of infinity. It's simply the counting numbers, the number of counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And there's an infinite number of those. But there's also the numbers such as a finite number like 1 or 2 divided by 0. How many times does 0 go into those numbers? Well, you can't even begin to count towards them, making it an even larger infinity. Now, the largest infinity that really exists is real infinity, meaning every real number from 0 through infinity. And you can't even begin counting that because, well, what about 0.1 and 0.2 and 0.3? Well, what about 0.01, 0.001, 0.0001? You can write an infinite number of zeros and then a 1 at some point, and you can never stop doing this, meaning real infinity is so big you can't even begin to count the first number. That's how big real infinity is. Now, there's also some paradoxes associated with infinity, such as the Zeno's paradox, which you probably heard of, where a race happens. Vsauce did a very interesting video about this, where a race happens and a guy goes half the distance to the finish line, and then now half of the race is left, and then they go half of the remaining distance, and half the remaining distance, half the remaining distance, half the remaining distance. And each one of these short distances that this guy is running is an interval, but since he will never reach the finish line because he'll just get closer and closer to the finish line, never actually reaching it. That means that in a finite space of the race, there's an infinite number of intervals. And of course, Vsauce did a very interesting video about this, where there's a screen that displays all the digits of pi. It displays the first digit for 30 seconds, the second one for 15 seconds, the third for 7.5 seconds, and it just gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and it approaches, it may have been 1 minute or 2 minutes. I think it was actually 2 minutes that it just approaches and approaches, using half the time to display a digit each time, meaning by the time it gets to 2 minutes, there would have been an infinite number of digits, meaning after 2 minutes, we would be seeing the final digit of pi. And that is extremely fascinating. A super task is what it is known as, and Vsauce did a video on that. Now, I'm going to have to wrap up here because I'm running out of time, but there is one final thing I'd like to talk about, and it's the fact that infinity is something that doesn't apply just to numbers and books and things. The universe, as we know it, may be infinite. There could be an infinite number of alternate realities. That means that everything that exists more than once, and every possible thing that can does exist. And that's a really fascinating concept, because just anything you can imagine, it exists somewhere, if the universe really is infinite, or if we live in a finite universe but in an infinite multiverse or omniverse. Just know that it exists. And I find that concept just really fascinating, that, you know, that kind of thing could really be real. So, yeah, go check out Vsauce's video if you haven't seen it already, and go into Numbervile's videos about infinity, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.